The first departure was not marked by war or ceremony, but by silence. In the year 2214, the skies of Earth became host to a geometry no human mind had anticipated. A single vessel, vast enough to blot out constellations, stationed itself at the edge of geostationary orbit. The craft shimmered, not metallic but iridescent, its surface shifting as though it was never truly still. Humanity named them the Arbiters, a word that carried judgment, impartiality, and inevitability. They remained for only 47 days. During that brief interlude, they spoke in mathematics and demonstrations, never in the intonations of any human tongue. Energy converters that drew from the planet's own magnetic field were left behind. Viral plagues that had haunted centuries of medicine were quietly erased from the genome. On the highways of Europe and the deserts of Africa, vehicles began to run on principles no university could fully explain but which functioned without failure. And then, as suddenly as they had come, they prepared to leave. No one knew why they had come at all. The Arbiters gave nothing of themselves. No names, no images of origin, no proof of biology. Only one statement, delivered not as sound but as a planetary transmission that arrived simultaneously in every mind capable of abstract thought. We shall return in 3 centuries. Prepare wisely. The promise was exact, leaving no ambiguity. Clocks were reset. Calendars were rewritten. Humanity now existed in an era before return and an era until return. The year 2214 had become year 0 of the waiting. When their ship finally lifted, there was no fire, no trail of exhaust. The craft elongated, shimmered, and then folded into a dimension humanity could not chart. Astronomers detected nothing but the faint warping of light. Philosophers debated whether the visitors had left at all, or merely withdrawn beyond perception. What lingered was not their presence but the weight of their promise. Nations bent their histories around it. Religions reinterpreted scripture to include it. Economists recalibrated timelines to match the projected 300-year horizon. Humanity had been told, with unnerving precision, when it would be judged again. Among the children who watched the departure was a Swiss girl named Elise Moreau, only 7 at the time, standing on a balcony in Lausanne as her father pointed at the faint distortion in the night sky. She remembered his words, delivered with uncharacteristic gravity. "You will never see them again, Elise. But your descendants will. It is their burden now." He was wrong. 3 centuries is not an expanse easily grasped by the human mind. Empires had risen and disintegrated in less. Languages had bloomed into dominance and faded into obscurity in the span of mere centuries. Yet the declaration of the Arbiters had imposed a structure on time itself, a horizon that stretched far beyond any ruler's reign or economist's projection. By the middle of the 26th century, the 300 years had shaped civilization in ways subtle and overt. Historians began to speak of the human world as a great countdown society. Entire disciplines had emerged not to study alien biology, of which nothing was known, but to model alien intent. The return of the Arbiters had become not merely a scientific expectation but a cultural inevitability. Cathedrals had been built with their prophecy etched into foundations. Schools taught orbital mechanics alongside scripture. Every government held ministries or departments dedicated to the return protocols, though their purposes differed sharply. Some envisioned diplomacy. Others prepared for war. It was into this atmosphere that Dr. Elise Moreau matured. Born long after her childhood memory of the departure, Elise was part of the 5th generation to live under the shadow of the return. Her career was shaped less by curiosity than by inevitability. Trained in astrophysics at the University of Geneva, she rose quickly within the European Observatory for Extraterrestrial Studies, a sprawling complex of telescopes, quantum relays, and research domes built high in the Alps. Its very existence was testament to the idea that humanity could prepare, given enough precision and patience. At 42, Elise had already earned the informal title Custodian of the Sky. It was her responsibility to track anomalies beyond the orbit of Neptune, to ensure that when the Arbiters returned, as they surely would, the world would not be caught unawares. The waiting had become ritualized. Each year closer to the appointed 300 brought renewed debates, new publications, fresh predictions. The sense of anticipation grew not unlike the approach of an eclipse, slow at first, then quickening until the final hours seemed unbearable. The Council of Nations had established a joint assembly for the return in Brussels, where delegates rehearsed endless variations of first contact speeches, agreements, and contingencies. By the 29th of March 2514, only 3 days remained. The council was scheduled to convene a special session. Elise had been summoned, along with a handful of specialists chosen for their fields of expertise. It was not the summons that unsettled her, but the timing. As she rode the magnetic shuttle from Geneva to Brussels, she gazed out at the landscapes of Europe. Fields of engineered wheat stretched for kilometers, designed to grow in cycles precisely calculated to coincide with climate models. Cities glowed with cold luminescence, powered by converters that still bore the unmistakable design lineage of alien technology. Humanity had not merely accepted the arbiter's gifts, it had built its entire modern identity upon them. Yet in the back of her mind, Elise carried an unease she rarely confessed, even to her closest colleagues. What if 300 years had been a lie? What if the precise figure had been chosen not as a promise, but as an experiment, to see what humans would do under the weight of certainty? The shuttle slowed as Brussels came into view, its skyline dominated by the glass spires of the Joint Assembly Complex. Holographic banners draped between towers proclaimed the phrase etched into every child's education: 3 centuries to prepare. She disembarked into a city alive with expectation. Crowds thronged public squares where countdown clocks blazed the remaining time in hours and minutes. Priests chanted verses written in the wake of the arbiter's first visit. Merchants sold trinkets, coins minted with alien silhouettes, glass pendants shaped like the iridescent hull of the vessel. For most of humanity, this was less dread than spectacle. Inside the assembly, however, the mood was different. Delegates filed into chambers built to echo the architecture of parliaments long past, their suits adorned with insignias of nation and creed. There Elise met 2 of her colleagues: Javier Ortega, the mathematician from Madrid whose work on extraterrestrial symmetry had influenced a generation of thinkers, and Anya Kowalska, Poland's envoy to the assembly, known equally for her diplomacy and her capacity to dismantle overconfidence in a single remark. Elise, Javier greeted her warmly, his accent softening the harsh lines of his words. 3 centuries and now 3 days. Can you believe it? We are alive at the pivot of history. Anya offered only a wry smile. If history is kind, perhaps. If not, then perhaps this is simply its conclusion. They were led into the chamber where the council awaited. Holographic projections floated in the air, displaying models of the expected orbital approach. The calculations were exact. The vessel, or its successor, would re-enter near Earth orbit on April 1, 2514, precisely 300 years after the first departure. The session was opened with ceremonial words. Plans were reviewed, roles rehearsed. Elise listened but found her attention drifting. She stared at the model of the alien craft above the chamber, an abstraction reduced to wireframe light. And then she felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, but a shift, an instinct sharpened by decades of observation. Her wrist console blinked urgently. Across the chamber, other devices lit up. Scientists glanced at one another, confusion spreading like a ripple. The assembly hushed as data streamed across the projections. Elise's pulse quickened. The anomaly was not near Neptune. It was here already, above the Baltic Sea. The arbiters had returned. Not in 3 centuries, not in 3 days. But now. It began as a line across the dawn sky, thin and argent, stretching from horizon to horizon above the Baltic Sea. At first, observers mistook it for the contrail of some experimental aircraft, but as the minutes passed, it thickened into a band of radiance, geometry imposed upon atmosphere. Elise Moreau watched the live feed from the assembly chamber. The projection showed thousands gathering on the coastlines of Sweden and Finland, staring upward at a structure that had no precedent. It was not a ship in any human sense. The object resembled a slab of light, featureless and smooth, yet vast enough to extend 60 kilometers in length. Its edges shimmered as if resisting focus, bending the atmosphere around it. For a moment, silence prevailed. Then the chamber erupted in overlapping voices. Diplomats shouted into headsets, military officers demanded confirmation, scientists scrambled to reconcile what they saw with 3 centuries of expectation. "They are early," Javier whispered beside her, his voice trembling not with awe but with outrage. "Why?" The assembly president called for order, but the noise outside the chamber had already begun. The sound of panic carried even through the insulated walls. Crowds in Brussels pouring into the streets, shouting, praying, some cheering as though welcoming prophecy fulfilled, others screaming betrayal. Then came the first action. Reports streamed in. The slab above the Baltic was not inert. Segments of its surface rippled outward, detaching like droplets from water. These fragments descended in arcs, slowing against gravity until they hovered low over coastal cities. They were smaller than the parent vessel but still immense, each the size of a cathedral. Elise's console registered their patterns. The fragments arranged themselves in strict formations, 3 by 3, 9 in total, hovering silently above populated areas. Anya's voice was steady, though her hands clenched the table. They are not here to parley. They are observing. But Elise saw something more. The drones, if that was what they were not simply watching. Their positions traced an unfamiliar pattern across the geography, a shape imposed upon the Earth itself. Her mind reached instinctively for mathematics. She sketched the formation on her console, linking points with luminous lines. What emerged was neither random nor decorative. It was a topology, a mapping of dimensional relationships beyond three-space. She had seen something like it in speculative cosmology, manifolds that folded space into lattices no human could traverse. "This is not a landing," she murmured. "It's a calibration." The word carried an alien chill. Before the assembly could debate, the chamber shook. A low vibration rolled through the floor as if the Earth itself had been struck. Emergency feeds showed chaos across the Baltic. One fragment had descended too low, scattering the rooftops of Helsinki with gale-force pressure waves. Windows shattered, towers swayed, sirens wailed. Civil defense units scrambled, though their weapons remained holstered, useless against such scale. Crowds surged against barricades, desperate to flee. Elise saw the image of a bridge collapsing under the weight of panic as civilians stampeded toward the countryside. Then came the silence again. The fragments ceased their descent. They held position, motionless, as if awaiting a signal only they could detect. Across their surfaces, faint bands of light pulsed outward, spreading like tides across the night sky. Every frequency monitor in the assembly chamber lit up at once. But no sound emerged, only a pressure in the mind, subtle yet unmistakable. Elise clenched her jaw against it, though no words formed. The sensation was less like communication and more like measurement, as if every neuron in her body were being scanned, weighed, recorded. Around her, others winced or groaned, pressing hands to temples. A few collapsed. Yet in seconds it was gone. The assembly chamber reeled in confusion. Anya spoke first, her tone bitter. 3 centuries of waiting and we are insects under glass. Elise steadied her breathing. The alien concept unfolding before her was not diplomacy or war, but survey. The arbiters, or their successors, had returned not to converse, but to compare, as though verifying an experiment against its baseline. And for the first time she wondered, perhaps the 300 years had not been a promise. Perhaps it had been a maximum allowance. Humanity had not been waiting for them. They had been waiting for humanity to reach some threshold, mathematical, biological, civilizational. And now, 3 days before the appointed hour, they had judged that threshold crossed. She looked again at the lattice pattern traced by the fragments, pulsing with alien order above the Baltic. "Calibration," she whispered again, though no one was listening. The arbiters had returned, and humanity was already inside their experiment. The 9 fragments held their positions above the Baltic like a constellation imposed on Earth. They neither spoke nor fired, yet their presence tore at the order of nations. In the assembly chamber, military advisors were the first to demand action. A French admiral argued for missile deployments. A German counterpart countered that any strike would invite annihilation. The Russian envoy insisted that silence was itself aggression. Within minutes the chamber was a chorus of raised voices, amplified by the panic outside. Elise ignored them. Her eyes were fixed on the projections, watching the fragments' flight patterns. Their positions shifted slowly, deliberately, like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. Each drone traced an arc before returning to its place, forming repeating cycles across the map. She overlaid the movements onto terrestrial coordinates. What emerged was unnerving. The arcs connected not to cities or borders, but to deep geological features, fault lines, mineral basins, ancient bedrock. The arbiters were not charting civilization. They were probing the planet itself. The alien concept solidified in her mind. Earth was not the subject. It was the substrate. Javier leaned over her console, his mathematician's eye catching the symmetry. "These paths, they are recursive. Each cycle folds back into itself like an algorithm testing for stability. It is computation, Elise. The planet is the computer." Before she could respond, a tremor rippled through the chamber. Emergency feeds lit up with new chaos. In Helsinki, one fragment had dipped lower, its surface opening like an iris. From its core poured a rain of crystalline shapes, glittering shards that fell without sound. They embedded themselves in streets, buildings, even the frozen harbor. Wherever they landed, they began to grow. Witnesses fled in terror as the shards extruded spindly filaments, branching structures of glass-like material that spread with alarming speed. Within minutes, a quarter of the harbor was covered in translucent growths, arching like frozen coral. Vehicles that struck them were absorbed, their metal shells dissolving into the lattice. Soldiers opened fire. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly. Plasma rifles left only brief scorch marks that the lattice immediately repaired. The growth continued, slow but inexorable, spreading across ice and steel alike. Elise gripped the edge of the console, her mind racing. This was no weapon in the human sense. It was construction, an expansion of the calibration process, extending into physical matter. Earth was being rewritten in alien architecture. The assembly descended into chaos. Some demanded nuclear strikes, others shouted for restraint. Anya, calm amid the storm, raised her voice above the din. Do you not see? They are not fighting us. They are testing us. Every action we take is part of their evaluation. Her words drew silence, however brief. Elise turned back to the projections. The fragments pulsing light now synchronized with the crystalline growth below. Frequencies rippled outward, not in sound but in fields measurable across the spectrum. Sensors showed subtle fluctuations in gravity itself, as though the drones were bending space into new alignments. An alien concept crystallized in her thoughts. They were using Earth's mass, its geometry, as raw material for a computation beyond human comprehension. And humanity was caught inside the experiment. Then abruptly the chamber lights died. Darkness swallowed the assembly, pierced only by the glow of emergency panels. Outside, the great countdown clocks that adorned Brussels went black. Across Europe, power grids collapsed, satellites blinked into silence, networks died in cascading failure. The arbiters had cut the eyes and ears from the world. The chamber erupted again, but Elise barely heard them. She was thinking of her father's words the night the arbiters left. It is their burden now. The burden had arrived, not in 3 centuries, not in 3 days, but in this very hour. And humanity was already inside their machinery. Darkness spread across Europe in waves. Cities once blazing with cold luminescence fell into shadow, their streets suddenly primitive under the pale glow of emergency lanterns. Aircraft grounded themselves mid-flight, rail systems halted. By midnight, half the continent was paralyzed. The assembly chamber became a theater of accusation. Delegates shouted across the darkened hall, their faces lit only by consoles running on local batteries. Fingers pointed, at the drones, at rival nations, at the very scientists who had spent centuries claiming they were prepared. This was a betrayal, thundered the Russian envoy, slamming his fist against the table. They said 300 years. We should have expected nothing less than deception. The promise was exact, countered a British delegate. It is we who failed to understand it. Anya Kowalska stood, her voice steady but sharp. You are both wrong. The arbiters are not liars, nor are they benefactors. They are conducting a process. And like children, we rage because we do not comprehend the lesson. Her words did not soothe the chamber. The fracture widened. Military officers whispered of seizing control from civilian governments. Religious leaders outside proclaimed the early return as divine reckoning. Protesters surged into the streets, some waving banners of welcome, others hurling stones at government buildings for failing to protect them. Meanwhile, the crystalline growth spread. Helsinki had been the first, but by dawn the following day, similar rainfalls of alien shards had occurred over Gdansk, Tallinn, and Stockholm. Each time the filaments extruded upward and outward, forming cathedral-like spires that fused seamlessly with human architecture. Soldiers who attempted to cut them down with artillery found their weapons useless. The structures simply absorbed the kinetic energy, glowing briefly as though feeding on the violence. Elise and Javier watched feeds from reconnaissance drones, one of the few systems still operating. What struck Elise was the orderliness of the growth. Each lattice was identical in scale and proportion, as though reproducing a single design again and again. It is replication, Javier muttered, scribbling equations in the dim light. A template enforced across multiple sites. They are inscribing something onto the planet. Elise felt the chill of the realization. Not onto. And Earth is becoming their ledger. In Paris, riots broke out. Citizens demanded that the military strike at once, even as others knelt in prayer before hastily built shrines of light. In Berlin, government officials evacuated the city center after a fragment hovered directly above, pulsing in rhythmic flashes that disabled all electronics below. Across the Atlantic, the North American Confederation accused Europe of mismanaging the crisis, while China declared that no foreign council would dictate its response. The fracture was no longer ideological, it was geopolitical. The assembly president pounded the table, calling for calm. We must speak with them. We must attempt communication. Javier shook his head grimly. Communication presumes we are participants. What if we are only variables? At that moment, a tremor rippled through the chamber once again. Elise's console flickered to life with new readings. Across every site where the crystalline spires had grown, the ground itself had begun to vibrate at low frequencies, resonances deep enough to stir the bedrock. It was as though the planet were being tuned like an instrument. Outside, panicked citizens flooded highways, only to find themselves caught in endless gridlock. Families abandoned vehicles, dragging children on foot. Soldiers clashed with rioters, weapons raised not at the alien sky but at fellow humans. The world was fracturing not under alien fire but under its own fear. Elise stared at the resonant readings, her pulse racing. The arbiters had returned not as conquerors nor as teachers. They had returned as surveyors, rewriting the planet into their pattern, and humanity itself was splintering in response. The Countdown Society had waited 3 centuries for unity. Instead, in 3 days it was tearing itself apart. While Europe fractured, strange signals began to pulse northward. The fragments above the Baltic altered their formations, their cycles tightening into spirals that converged over the Arctic Circle. Satellites, those few not yet disabled, picked up energy signatures flowing along magnetic lines, as if the drones were pouring power directly into the Earth's poles. At the observatory, Elise ran the data twice, then a third time. There was no mistake. The resonance patterns were concentrating on Greenland's ice sheet. Something was buried there, something older than the fragments now filling the skies. The assembly was paralyzed, nations too busy accusing each other to act. Yet the scientific community still held sway in certain corners. A multinational expedition was authorized, pieced together hastily from what ships and aircraft still functioned without alien interference. Elise found herself aboard the Nordlys, a Norwegian icebreaker modified with quantum relay gear. Javier Ortega came at her insistence, his mathematician's eye vital for recognizing patterns. Anya Kowalska joined under orders from her government, though Elise suspected she wanted answers as much as any scientist. The voyage north was both swift and uneasy. The Arctic waters were unusually calm, as though the ocean itself were waiting. From the deck, Elise could see faint auroral bands glowing not green but pale violet, shimmering across the horizon with unnatural regularity. When they reached the coordinates, the ice was already cracking. Great fissures radiated outward in hexagonal patterns, as if the ice itself had been carved from below. The ship's sensors confirmed massive structures beneath, metallic geometries that spanned kilometers, lying dormant under 3 centuries of snow and frost. They never left, Javier murmured, staring at the readouts. They seeded the planet with machines. Watching. Recording. The expedition deployed autonomous diggers, spider-like crawlers armed with thermal drills. Within hours they had cut through to a cavern beneath the ice, vast enough to swallow the Nordlys whole. The team descended in pressurized suits, their headlamps piercing the darkness. What they found silenced even the most skeptical soldiers. Beneath the ice lay a vault of alien architecture. Towers of iridescent alloy rose like frozen forests, their surfaces alive with faint light that pulsed in perfect synchrony with the fragments above the Baltic. At the heart of the chamber stood a colossal sphere, seamless and dark, surrounded by suspended frames like the ribs of a planetary skeleton. Elise approached the sphere, her breath echoing in her helmet. As she drew close, the surface shimmered and opened. Not mechanically, not with hinges or seams. It simply parted, revealing an interior lit by floating geometries of light. Symbols, not language but mathematics, shifted in and out of existence, equations suspended in midair. She raised her hand instinctively. The equations responded, rearranging themselves into forms she recognized. Fibonacci sequences, prime distributions, recursive sets. They were not meant to be read. They were meant to be recognized. It's an archive, she whispered. The others crowded around. Within the sphere, the light condensed into images, flickering projections of Earth itself. Wars, revolutions, discoveries, disasters, all rendered in astonishing clarity. Entire centuries collapsed into seconds. Elise saw the burning of cities, the launch of ships, the curing of plagues, the rise and fall of governments. Humanity's story recorded without consent. Anya's face was pale. They have been watching us for 300 years. No, Elise corrected softly. Longer. This archive is not just history, It is biology. The projections shifted again, this time to strands of DNA, catalogs of genomes, records of mutations. Every species, every lineage preserved. Even extinct animals flickered across the chamber, restored from their genetic ghosts. Humanity itself was reduced to code, archived like insects in amber. The realization pressed down on them all. The arbiters had not trusted humanity to prepare alone. They had curated its history, preserved its biology, monitored its every decision. Free will itself seemed compromised, every act weighed against an alien ledger. Then the ground shook. The vault's towers flared with light, responding to some signal from above. The crystalline structures in Helsinki and Stockholm pulsed in unison, as if awakened by the unsealing of the archive. The sphere's projections dissolved into blinding white, then vanished. From the surface, crew aboard the Nordlys reported a new phenomenon. The fragment above Greenland was descending. Slowly, steadily, it lowered toward the ice sheet, casting its shadow across the horizon. Elise's mind raced. The vault was not a relic. It was an interface. The arbiters had returned not to reintroduce themselves, but to reclaim what they had never truly relinquished. The descent of the fragment froze the expedition in silence. It hung above Greenland like a new moon, its surface shifting with geometries that defied human architecture. From the ship's bridge, the crew transmitted desperate messages to every channel still functional. But satellites stuttered. Communication collapsed into static. Beneath the ice, Elise refused to retreat. She had felt something inside the archive respond to her presence, as though the vault had recognized her, not as an individual but as a representative sample. The sphere's interior still shimmered faintly, though the blinding white had faded. She stepped inside once more. The projections reassembled, this time with deliberate order. No longer random images of history but curated displays, timelines organized, edited, annotated. Events were stripped of their noise, rendered as choices. Wars reduced to a single divergence. A treaty signed or broken. A scientific discovery shared or suppressed. A leader assassinated or spared. Each decision pivoted history one way or another, and the archive showed both the act and its consequence. God, Javier whispered. It's not just memory. It's evaluation. Anya's jaw tightened. They've been judging us. Symbols bloomed across the chamber, glowing equations that branched like living trees. Elise recognized probability graphs, divergence curves, statistical outcomes. For each event, the arbiters had calculated alternatives, pathways humanity might have taken. And every branch was tagged with a mark. Not words but simple binary stamps. Approval, rejection. They had not simply recorded humanity's story. They had scored it. Elise's stomach churned. Every war, every famine, every collapse. They've been measuring us against some standard. Whose standard? Anya snapped. Theirs? We don't even know what they want. A sudden tremor ran through the vault. The suspended towers flared with light, and for a moment Elise thought the chamber would collapse. But instead, the floor beneath the sphere rippled and opened, revealing a spiral descent deeper into the ice. Without waiting for consensus, Elise started down. The others followed reluctantly, weapons drawn though useless against what lay below. The passage ended in a chamber unlike the vault above. This was no archive of images but a hall of mirrors, liquid surfaces suspended in frames, each one reflecting not their bodies but versions of humanity. In one mirror, Elise saw a world scarred by endless war, cities reduced to ruins, humanity clinging to survival. In another, she saw glittering towers, a unified species stretching toward the stars. A third showed something stranger still. Humans altered, their forms blended with alien symmetry, no longer bound to a single biology. Each mirror was a possible path. Each was a judgment. Javier stumbled back from one of the reflections. They're not just recording what we do. They're testing scenarios. Simulations. Anya's eyes narrowed. Simulations of us. That means they know what we will do before we do it. Elise reached out to one of the liquid frames. It rippled, then surged outward, swallowing her vision. She was no longer in the chamber. She was on a battlefield, not memory, not history, but a possibility. Soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms fought across blasted plains, wielding weapons she did not recognize. The air was filled with choking dust. Above them, alien constructs hovered, indifferent observers. She felt herself both present and absent, a ghost inhabiting a potential future. And then, just as suddenly, she was pulled back into the chamber, gasping. Her companions stared at her in alarm. The mirror's surface still shivered with the afterimage of the battlefield. "They're modeling us," Elise said, her voice shaking. "Every choice, every system, every outcome. We've been living inside their experiment for centuries." The weight of it pressed on all of them. Humanity was not free, not truly. Every triumph and failure had been curated, nudged, measured against alien thresholds. If history was an exam, then Earth was a classroom, and the examiners had returned to grade the final test. From above, the descending fragment pulsed once, casting violet light through the ice. The mirrors all shifted in unison, collapsing their divergent paths into a single reflection, humanity standing before the arbiters. And then the vault spoke. Not with sound, but with a vibration that resonated inside bone and thought. A voice without language, yet unmistakable in intent. Final phase initiated. The chamber went dark. The announcement inside the Greenland vault reverberated far beyond its icebound chamber. Around the globe, the fragments altered their behavior. No longer drifting aimlessly or shedding crystalline filaments, they began to descend. Paris saw the first landing. A shard the size of a cathedral hovered above the Place de la Concorde before folding in on itself like an origami construct, shrinking to a smooth ovoid barely 10 meters high. Its surface shimmered, not reflective but translucent, as though concealing immense depth within. The crowd that had gathered, protesters, soldiers, priests, fell silent. The ovoid pulsed. A wave rippled through the air, tossing aside weapons, extinguishing flames, silencing vehicles. Communications collapsed into static across half the city. For the first time, the fragment projected not raw energy but a form. It was not humanoid. The being that emerged was a lattice of angles, a geometry that unfolded in 3 dimensions and then 4, shapes glimpsed only for instants before the human eye failed. Where it moved, shadows bent unnaturally, and the air shimmered like heat haze. The crowd broke. Some fled screaming. Others knelt. A few simply stared, transfixed. Then came the voice. Not sound, not vibration, but direct intrusion into the mind. "We have measured. We will now weigh." All across the world, similar apparitions emerged. In Berlin, in Shanghai, in Sao Paulo, each fragment extruded its arbiters. They were not machines, not spirits, but projections of a higher dimensional form compressed into human perception. Their judgment carried a weight that was not metaphorical. It pressed on the chest, constricted the lungs, slowed the heart. Governments responded with desperation. Tanks rolled into Paris, their barrels aimed at the ovoid. The arbiter did not flinch. When the first shell fired, it dissolved in midair, fragmented into harmless dust. The arbiter pulsed once in response. A ripple tore outward, hurling armored vehicles into the Seine as though they were toys. Soldiers scattered. Elise, watching the feed from the Greenland vault, clenched her fists. It's not defense. It's demonstration. They're showing us the futility of resistance. Javier's voice was low, strained. They're executing the final exam. Meanwhile, chaos spread among the public. Crowds surged toward the arbiters, demanding answers, salvation, or revenge. Religious sects proclaimed the return as divine trial. Militias attacked with whatever weapons they had left, only to be brushed aside by invisible pulses of force. Yet there was one more revelation. In Cairo, an arbiter did not simply appear, it split. The lattice divided into multiple geometries, each one gravitating toward an individual in the crowd. The chosen were paralyzed, suspended midair, their eyes glowing with alien light. The arbiter's voice boomed inside every mind within range. Representatives selected. Your species will be heard. It was not conquest. It was tribunal. Humanity was to stand trial before an intelligence that had been curating its every choice for centuries. Back in Greenland, the vault reawakened. The mirrors blazed to life, projecting not possibilities now but judgments. Wars marked red, alliances marked green, innovations left untagged as though irrelevant. Elise, Javier, and Anya staggered beneath the torrent of history reduced to verdicts. The ground shook violently. Above them, the descending fragment drove itself fully into the ice, carving a shaft that fused with the vault. The arbiter from Paris, or something like it, emerged within, its angular lattice unfolding like a living theorem. Elise could not breathe. The weight of its presence pressed against her mind. You have been measured, it intoned. Now you will defend your record. The vault's mirrors shifted again, no longer showing branching paths but faces. Leaders, tyrants, thinkers, poets, soldiers. A mosaic of humanity across centuries. Each face shimmered as though waiting for testimony. Then the arbiter extended one angular appendage toward Elise. Not random. Not Javier. Not Anya. You will speak. The chamber groaned, ice cracking under the stress. Soldiers outside opened fire, their bullets rattling uselessly against the fragment's hull. The Arbiter ignored them, its lattice tightening like the iris of an alien eye, focusing wholly on Elise. Anya raised her weapon instinctively, but Elise shook her head, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. If this is a trial, she said, then humanity deserves a defense. But you'll hear it on our terms. The Arbiter did not answer in words. Instead, the mirrors behind it rippled, displaying the future of Earth as a collapsing sequence. Riots, famines, nuclear exchanges, the species devouring itself. The message was clear. Without intervention, humanity would destroy itself. The tribunal had begun. The Arbiters did not gather in one place. Instead, they superimposed their presence across dozens of cities at once, their lattice geometries overlapping with landmarks, plazas, and government halls. They bent the laws of perception. Citizens in Paris saw the Arbiter within their square, while in Tokyo the same Arbiter was perceived against Shinjuku's skyline. One entity, countless vantage points. And across those cities, representatives were chosen. They rose, unwilling or unprepared, suspended in midair by invisible fields. Generals, scientists, poets, farmers, children. There was no pattern. Selection ignored office and privilege. Elise Kowalska was among them, dragged upward from the Greenland vault, her body weightless as the ice blurred beneath her. She found herself projected into a vast chamber of light, neither physical nor imagined but a fusion of both. There were hundreds of others beside her. She recognized Javier, floating in shock, and Anya, teeth clenched as though she might bite her way free. Beyond them, strangers from every corner of the world, skin tones, languages, ages, all caught in the lattice. The chamber pulsed, and the Arbiters spoke in unison. Their voices bypassed sound, echoing directly into thought. Your species has been curated. Its record stands before you. You will speak to it. You will answer. The walls dissolved into a panorama of human history. Battles unspooled in grotesque beauty, cavalry charges frozen mid-gallop, mushroom clouds blossoming silently, mass graves flickering into skyscrapers and then collapsing again. The images accelerated, artworks painted, symphonies composed, vaccines discovered, revolutions rising and falling. A mosaic of cruelty and wonder. Representatives cried out in horror, others in reverence. Some reached toward the images as if to touch their ancestors. The first to speak was a boy, perhaps 12, his voice trembling. Why show us only the blood? There was more. There was kindness. The Arbiter's lattice turned toward him. 1,000 mirrors formed around his body, replaying moments of tenderness. Parents cradling infants, hands lifting the fallen, strangers sharing food. The Arbiter pulsed once. Noted. Insufficient to alter aggregate measure. The boy wept silently. Next came a general, medals glinting on his chest. His voice was hard, defiant. War forged us. Without it there is no progress. You judge from afar without knowing the cost of survival. The Arbiter responded by showing his own campaigns. Civilians fleeing bombardments, children crying beside collapsed houses. The general flinched but did not relent. That blood made us strong. Strength measured. Strength misapplied. The general's medals dissolved into dust, right there in the projection. He collapsed, sobbing, not from pain but from the annihilation of meaning. Anya's turn came. She spat the words, "You set the standard. You played gods and then marked us for failing tests you never explained. If we are cruel, it is because you engineered us to be watched." The Arbiter paused. For the first time, its lattice dimmed as though considering. When it replied, its tone shifted, almost reluctant. Observation is not compulsion. Variables evolve under pressure. You chose. The chamber shook. Outside, the trial reverberated into the streets. In Cairo, crowds hurled stones at the Arbiter's form, shouting for freedom. In New Delhi, worshippers bowed, begging forgiveness. In Washington, the military fired missiles into the sky, only to see them curve and vanish, detonated harmlessly in the stratosphere. The tribunal was inescapable, its gravity psychological as much as physical. Elise finally found her voice. She forced herself to look directly at the lattice. Then judge us on more than mathematics. You weigh death's, war's power, but do you weigh intent? Do you weigh the choice to learn from our failures? The chamber brightened. Mirrors unfolded around her, replaying her own life in ruthless detail. Her earliest research papers, her failures in diplomacy, the faces of colleagues she had once ignored or dismissed. She saw herself through their lens, stripped bare. Shame burned her cheeks. Yet she did not look away. We are not your calculations. We are more than your record. If you cannot see that, then you have already failed your own test. The arbiter's lattice stilled. For the first time, silence reigned. And then, an alien concept unfolded. The chamber fractured into layers as though space itself were peeled back. Representatives glimpsed other species. Civilizations Elise could not comprehend, beings of gas and light, insectoid empires, aquatic minds singing across oceans. All of them projected in similar trials, their histories displayed, their choices weighed. Earth was not unique. It was one courtroom among thousands. The tribunal is universal, the arbiter intoned. Few endure. Many collapse. Some ascend. Judgment will determine your placement among them. Panic broke among the humans. Some screamed, others begged. Javier whispered hoarsely beside Elise, "We're not alone. We were never alone. They've been cataloging us, the whole galaxy." And then the final act of the tribunal began. The walls lit with 3 outcomes displayed like verdicts. Assimilation. Humanity's biology and culture dissolved into the arbiter's greater lattice. Individuality sacrificed for survival. Isolation. The planet sealed, cut off from the wider network, left to collapse or endure alone. Ascension. Integration into the arbiter's higher community, conditional on proving that humanity could transcend its cycle of destruction. The arbiter's voices shook every bone, every mind. Choose. And across Earth the trial rippled outward. Streets erupted in chaos. Armies mutinied, governments fractured, civilians fled or prayed or rioted. The tribunal was no longer abstract, it demanded decision. Elise clenched her fists, the weight of a species pressing down on her. 3 choices. None merciful. All irrevocable. The fate of humanity hung in silence. The chamber of light trembled as the 3 verdicts hung in the air, each outcome displayed like commandments carved into reality. Assimilation. Isolation. Ascension. The representatives floated, paralyzed between fear and awe. Some shouted for survival at any cost. Assimilation, a surrender to certainty. Others, bristling with pride, roared for isolation. Better to perish free than to kneel. And a few, their voices faint against the storm, whispered for the third path. Ascension, though none could define what it demanded. The arbiter's lattice pulsed, patient but implacable. Choose. Chaos spread through the assembly. A farmer from the Andes screamed that assimilation would erase his children. A general from North America demanded isolation, his face purple with rage. A young woman from Lagos raised her voice, trembling but clear. We must try the third path. If we fall, let it be reaching upward. Her words rippled through the chamber, magnified in resonance. Elise felt it strike her chest like a drumbeat. Ascension was not a guarantee of survival, it was a leap into uncertainty. But wasn't that humanity's defining trait? To reach for the unknown, again and again even in the face of annihilation? Elise found herself speaking before she realized it. We have stumbled. We have destroyed. But we have also created. If you have judged us only by our cruelties, then judge us too by our striving. We choose ascension. The chamber silenced. One by one representatives raised their hands. Some with conviction, others with tears. Javier, pale but resolute, lifted his. Anya glared, jaw set, then followed. Slowly, across the hall of mirrors, more hands rose until the choice crystallized. Not unanimous, but enough. Ascension. The arbiter's lattice expanded, a geometry so vast Elise's mind quailed at its unfolding. The 3 verdicts dissolved, leaving only one path, shimmering like a bridge of light. Choice registered. Outcome provisional. Ascension requires transformation. Trial continues. The chamber fractured. Each representative was hurled back into their body, cast down into their cities, their nations. Across the world, the arbiters pulsed, sending waves of force through oceans, mountains, and skies. Humanity reeled as the planet itself vibrated with alien resonance. In Paris, crowds fell to their knees as the arbiter's form expanded, enveloping the sky with living light. In Cairo, the chosen hovered still above the masses, their eyes blazing. In Beijing, missiles launched against the fragments curved back toward their silos, detonating harmlessly in the air, neutralized before impact. And in Greenland, Elise staggered onto the ice as the vault behind her collapsed into a pool of liquid crystal, absorbed by the descending fragment. Javier's voice was ragged, almost reverent. We passed. Or at least, we weren't condemned. Anya shook her head. Not yet. They said the trial continues. We've been given another threshold. Above them, the fragments shuddered and ascended, carrying the vault's knowledge into orbit. For the first time, Elise saw beyond Earth's atmosphere. Dozens of fragments clustered together, weaving into a lattice that stretched like a web across the stars. And within it, she glimpsed others. Planets, civilizations, species all caught in their own trials, their own verdicts. Humanity was a single note in a galactic symphony of judgment. The Arbiter's final words resonated across every human mind, a message etched into bone and memory. You have chosen the path of ascent. You will rise, or you will break. We will return. And with that, the fragments lifted, their geometries folding into invisibility until only the night sky remained, suddenly too vast, too alive. The world was left in stunned silence. Cities smoldered, governments fractured, but for the first time since the Arbiter's return, humanity shared a single truth. They had not been erased. They had not been abandoned. They had been challenged. Elise gazed upward, her breath a cloud in the freezing air. For the first time she felt no terror, only a weight heavy but strangely liberating. The countdown had been wrong and the return premature. But perhaps the lesson was the same. Humanity's future was not a gift. It was a verdict yet unfinished.